For 6 generations, every woman in the Ashcroft family who reached her 70th birthday began doing the same inexplicable thing. At precisely 3:17 in the morning, she would rise from her bed, walk to the eastern wall of her bedroom, place both palms flat against the plaster, and whisper urgently for exactly 43 minutes. The words were always the same, spoken in a language that predated English, a dialect so ancient that scholars who later studied the recordings couldn't identify its origins. When the 43 minutes ended, each woman would collapse unconscious and remember nothing upon waking. This ritual continued nightly until their deaths, which always occurred exactly 7 months after it began. The medical community dismissed it as hereditary dementia. The family called it the Ashcroft curse. But when linguists finally decoded those midnight whispers in 2021, they discovered the women weren't speaking to empty walls at all. They were giving detailed instructions for surviving something that was coming, something that had been coming for over 300 years. Tonight, we examine the sealed records of the Ashcroft family, recently released after a century-long legal battle. What emerges is not a tale of mental illness, but of inherited knowledge passed through bloodlines in ways science cannot explain. A story that begins in 1692 with a witch trial in Salem and ends in modern-day Vermont with a discovery that forced the government to classify an entire family's medical records as matters of national security. The first Ashcroft to exhibit the phenomenon was Mercy Ashcroft, born Mercy Wickham, in Salem Village in 1679. She was 13 when the witch trials began, old enough to understand the hysteria consuming her community, young enough to believe the accusations might be true. Her own mother, goodwife Hannah Wickham, was among the first to point fingers at neighbors, claiming she had witnessed spectral evidence of witchcraft in her dreams. Mercy's family lived in a small house on the outskirts of Salem Village, close enough to hear the screams from the jail where accused witches awaited trial, far enough to feel safe from suspicion. But safety in Salem was an illusion that shattered with each new accusation. When Bridget Bishop was hanged on Gallows Hill in June 1692, Mercy pressed her face to her bedroom window and watched the smoke rising from the town center. That night, she heard her first whisper. It came not from outside, but from within the walls themselves. A woman's voice, speaking words Mercy couldn't understand, but somehow felt in her bones. The voice seemed to emanate from the eastern wall of her room, the one that faced towards Salem town, where the trials were held. Mercy placed her ear against the rough plaster and listened as the voice repeated the same phrases over and over, urgent and desperate, as if trying to convey information of vital importance. When Mercy told her mother about the voice, Hannah's reaction was swift and violent. She struck her daughter across the face and demanded she never speak such nonsense again. In Salem in 1692, hearing voices could be interpreted as either divine revelation or demonic possession, and the difference often determined whether one lived or died. Hannah had watched too many neighbors dragged away in chains to risk her daughter's life over childhood imaginings. But the whispers persisted. Every night at 3:17, the voice returned, speaking its incomprehensible message with increasing urgency. Mercy began to notice patterns in the sounds, repetitive phrases that seemed to contain numbers, directions, warnings. She started copying down phonetic approximations of what she heard, filling page after page with strange syllables that looked like no language she had ever seen. The breakthrough came in August, when 19-year-old Sarah Good was executed. That night, the voice in Mercy's wall changed. Instead of the urgent whispers, Mercy heard weeping, followed by what sounded like prayers in the same unknown tongue. But mixed within the prayers were words Mercy recognized. Names of Salem residents, dates, specific locations within the village. The voice was providing information about the trials, details that Mercy had no way of knowing, but that proved accurate when she later verified them. Mercy began to understand that the voice belonged to someone with intimate knowledge of the witch trial proceedings, someone who was trying to pass along crucial information about what was really happening in Salem. The whispers contained lists of names of those who would be accused next, descriptions of evidence that would be presented against them, even predictions of how the trials would ultimately end. Armed with this knowledge, Mercy tried to warn potential victims, but her attempts only aroused suspicion. When she told Goodwife Proctor that she would be accused of witchcraft within a week, and Elizabeth Proctor was indeed arrested 6 days later, people began to wonder how young Mercy could have such prophetic abilities. Some whispered that she herself might be practicing witchcraft. Sensing the danger, Hannah Wickham made a desperate decision. She packed her family's belongings in the dead of night and fled Salem Village, heading north to the wilderness of what would later become Vermont. They settled near a trading post on the Connecticut River, where Hannah's husband could find work, and Mercy could be far from the madness consuming Salem, but the whispers followed them. Even in their new home, hundreds of miles from Salem, Mercy continued to hear the voice in her bedroom wall at precisely 3:17 each morning. Now, however, the messages had changed. Instead of information about the trials, the voice spoke of preparations, of things that must be remembered, of knowledge that must be preserved. The voice seemed to be teaching Mercy, preparing her for some future responsibility she didn't understand. Mercy married a local trapper named Josiah Ashcroft in 1698 and bore him 5 children. She never told her husband about the whispers, fearing he would think her mad or worse. But she noticed that the voice grew stronger during her pregnancies, particularly when she was carrying daughters. It was as if the presence in the wall was somehow connected to the women of her bloodline, passing information through generations yet unborn. When Mercy turned 70 in 1749, the nature of her relationship with the voice changed dramatically. Instead of simply listening to the whispers, she found herself compelled to respond. At 3:17 each morning, she would rise and place her palms against the eastern wall of her bedroom, speaking back to the voice in the same ancient language she had been hearing for over 50 years. The words came from her mouth without conscious thought, as if she had always known how to speak this forgotten tongue. Mercy's daughter-in-law, Ruth, documented these midnight conversations in a diary she kept hidden beneath the floorboards. Ruth described how Mercy's voice during these sessions took on a different quality, deeper and more resonant than her normal speech. She seemed to be providing reports about the family, the community, changes in the world, since the voice had last communicated with the living. Most unnervingly, Mercy appeared to be receiving instructions, nodding in response to unheard questions, and occasionally arguing with the presence as if negotiating terms of some agreement. The conversations continued for exactly 7 months, ending abruptly when Mercy died in her sleep on a cold February morning in 1750. Her final words, spoken to Ruth as she lay dying, were a warning. The voice will choose one of the daughters. She must be ready to listen, ready to remember, ready to preserve what must not be lost. When Ruth pressed her for more details, Mercy could only repeat, "Something comes. Not yet, but soon. The bloodline must endure until it arrives." Mercy's prediction proved accurate. Her granddaughter, Patience Ashcroft, began hearing whispers in her bedroom wall when she turned 70 in 1773. But Patience's experience differed from her grandmother's in crucial ways. Where Mercy had conversed with a single voice, Patience communicated with what sounded like multiple entities, overlapping whispers that seemed to represent different time periods and perspectives. Ruth, now an old woman herself, observed Patience's midnight rituals with growing alarm. Unlike Mercy's relatively calm conversations, Patience's sessions were intense and emotionally charged. She would weep as she spoke to the wall, sometimes laughing with delight, occasionally backing away in apparent fear. Ruth recorded that Patience seemed to be experiencing visions along with the auditory communications, describing scenes from different historical periods with vivid detail. During one particularly intense session, Patience described watching the Salem witch trials as if she were present in the courtroom, but her description contained details that differed significantly from official records, suggesting she was witnessing events from the perspective of someone who had been there. She spoke of seeing innocent people confess to crimes they hadn't committed, of witnessing evidence being fabricated, of understanding the political and personal motivations behind the accusations. More disturbing were Patience's descriptions of what she called the real witches. According to her midnight testimonies, there had indeed been individuals in Salem practicing forms of magic, but they were not the people who were executed. The real practitioners had used their abilities to hide, to misdirect attention, to ensure that only the innocent faced the gallows. They had escaped justice by sacrificing their neighbors, and their descendants carried knowledge that posed a threat to the established order. Patience's whispers revealed that the voice Mercy had heard belonged to one of these hidden practitioners, a woman who had orchestrated much of the Salem tragedy from behind the scenes. This woman had found a way to preserve her consciousness beyond death, anchoring it to bloodlines that carried genetic memories of the trials. She was using successive generations of Ashcroft women as conduits, gradually building towards some larger purpose that wouldn't be achieved for centuries. The revelation that their family had been in communication with one of the true Salem witches terrified Ruth. But Patience seemed oddly comforted by the knowledge. She explained that the entity was not malevolent, merely determined to complete a task that had been interrupted by her physical death. The witch had been working to prevent something catastrophic, a convergence of supernatural forces that occurred in cycles lasting hundreds of years. Salem had been the last opportunity to prepare for this event, but the trials had disrupted the necessary rituals and preparations. Now, the responsibility fell to the Ashcroft bloodline. Each generation of women would carry forward pieces of crucial knowledge, adding their own experiences and observations to a growing repository of information. When the next convergence began, the accumulated wisdom of multiple lifetimes would be available to guide humanity through the crisis. Patience died exactly 7 months after her first whisper session, but not before passing detailed instructions to her daughter-in-law about what to expect from future generations. She explained that the phenomenon would skip randomly through the bloodline, choosing women who possessed the necessary spiritual sensitivity. Not every generation would produce a communicator, but when one appeared, she would have access to all the knowledge preserved by her predecessors. The third documented case occurred in 1834, when Constance Ashcroft began her whisper sessions at age 70. By this time, the family had moved to a larger farm in central Vermont, and Constance's son William had become prosperous enough to hire scholars from nearby Dartmouth College to study his mother's condition. These academic observers provided the first systematic documentation of the phenomenon, recording not only Constance's words, but also environmental changes that occurred during her sessions. The scholars noted that the temperature in Constance's bedroom dropped by exactly 14 degrees during each whisper session, regardless of outside weather conditions. Compass needles spun wildly when brought near the eastern wall during active communication. Most remarkably, sensitive individuals among the observers reported feeling a powerful presence in the room, describing sensations of being watched by multiple invisible entities. Dr. Ephraim Hartwell, a professor of natural philosophy at Dartmouth, attempted to apply scientific methods to understanding Constance's communications. He installed measuring devices throughout her bedroom, documented precise timings of each session, and worked with linguists to analyze the language she spoke. His findings, published in a private report that the family kept secret for over a century, concluded that Constance was engaging in genuine communication with non-corporeal intelligences. Dr. Hartwell's linguistic analysis revealed that Constance spoke in what appeared to be a fusion of ancient Celtic dialects, pre-Columbian indigenous languages, and grammatical structures that didn't match any known human tongue. The vocabulary contained words for concepts that wouldn't be formally recognized by science until the 20th century. Quantum mechanics, electromagnetic fields, dimensional barriers. Somehow, Constance was receiving and transmitting information that was centuries ahead of contemporary human knowledge. The content of Constance's communications had evolved from her predecessors' experiences. where patients had focused on historical events and warnings about future convergences, Constance received detailed technical instructions. She spoke of calculations involving celestial movements, descriptions of locations where supernatural phenomena would manifest, and procedures for containing or directing otherworldly energies. Dr. Hartwell realized that the Ashcroft women were not simply communicating with spirits of the dead, they were interfacing with intelligences that possessed knowledge spanning multiple time periods simultaneously. These entities could observe past, present, and future as concurrent realities, allowing them to provide information and instructions that prepared for events that wouldn't occur for generations. Constance's whispers included increasingly specific predictions about technological developments that would be necessary for humanity's survival during the next convergence. She described devices that wouldn't be invented until the late 20th century, communication systems that resembled modern internet networks, and energy sources that matched descriptions of nuclear power. The entities were apparently guiding human technological development, ensuring that the right tools would be available when the crisis arrived. The intensity of these advanced communications took a severe toll on Constance's physical health. Unlike her predecessors, who had appeared relatively calm during their sessions, Constance often collapsed from exhaustion after particularly complex transmissions. Dr. Hartwell documented seizure-like episodes that occurred when she attempted to process information that seemed beyond human comprehension. Her body was being pushed to its limits by serving as a conduit for knowledge that mortal minds weren't designed to contain. When Constance died in 1835, her final words were a mathematical equation that Dr. Hartwell spent years trying to understand. Decades later, when Einstein's theories of relativity were published, the equation was recognized as an early formulation of concepts that wouldn't be formally discovered until the early 1900s. Constance had died while transmitting scientific knowledge that was 70 years ahead of its time. The fourth-generation communicator was Rebecca Ashcroft, who began her sessions in 1889. By this point, the family had accepted their role as guardians of supernatural knowledge, and they had developed protocols for supporting each woman through her 7 months of communication. Rebecca's sessions were attended by doctors, recorded by stenographers, and analyzed by experts in multiple fields. Rebecca's communications marked a significant escalation in the urgency of the transmitted information. Where previous generations had received preparatory knowledge and historical context, Rebecca was given operational instructions. The entities spoke through her about specific actions that needed to be taken, locations that required monitoring, individuals who possessed supernatural abilities and needed to be recruited or neutralized. The whispers revealed that the next convergence was approaching more rapidly than originally calculated. Technological progress had accelerated the timeline, and events that were supposed to unfold over centuries were compressing into decades. The entities were scrambling to adjust their plans, using Rebecca to coordinate with other bloodlines and organizations that had been receiving similar supernatural guidance. Rebecca's communications included detailed descriptions of a network of families, secret societies, and institutions that had been influenced by otherworldly intelligences for centuries. The Ashcroft bloodline was just one node in a vast web of human agents working toward the same goal, ensuring humanity's survival when supernatural forces invaded the physical world on a scale not seen since prehistoric times. The technical information Rebecca transmitted was far beyond anything previous generations had received. She provided blueprints for devices that could detect interdimensional incursions, formulas for substances that could repel certain types of supernatural entities, and tactical strategies for containing otherworldly invasions. Her bedroom became a command center where invisible generals planned campaigns against enemies that existed outside normal reality. Dr. Marcus Whitmore, a psychiatrist who studied Rebecca's case, noted that she seemed to have access to multiple distinct personalities during her sessions. Her voice would change to reflect different entities, each with unique speech patterns and areas of expertise. One entity focused on military strategy, another on scientific principles, a third on occult practices. Rebecca served as a medium for what appeared to be an entire council of supernatural advisors. The physical effects of these intense communications were more severe than anything previous generations had experienced. Rebecca aged rapidly during her 7 months of sessions, her hair turning completely white and her face acquiring deep lines that made her appear 20 years older. Dr. Whitmore documented severe neurological symptoms that suggested her brain was being restructured to accommodate alien forms of consciousness. Rebecca's death in 1890 was accompanied by phenomena that convinced even skeptical observers that supernatural forces were involved. Witnesses reported seeing luminous figures surrounding her deathbed, hearing voices speaking in unison as she passed away, and feeling the presence of invisible entities filling the room. Her final transmission was a detailed schedule of events leading up to the convergence, with dates, locations, and specific individuals who would play crucial roles. The fifth generation brought Margaret Ashcroft to the role in 1943 during the height of World War II. By this time, the family's supernatural communications had attracted the attention of government agencies that were investigating occult phenomena for potential military applications. Margaret's sessions were monitored by intelligence officers who recognized the strategic value of the information she was receiving. Margaret's whispers revealed that global conflicts like World War II were not random historical events, but part of a larger supernatural influence over human affairs. The entities explained that otherworldly forces had been manipulating human civilization for millennia, gradually preparing the species for a final confrontation that would determine whether humanity evolved or was consumed by forces beyond its understanding. The war itself was described as a rehearsal, a way of testing human organizational capabilities and technological development under extreme stress. The entities had influenced both sides of the conflict, ensuring that certain weapons were developed, certain strategies were tested, and certain individuals gained experience in commanding large-scale operations under supernatural pressure. Margaret's communications included warnings about specific supernatural threats that would emerge during the convergence. She described entities that fed on fear and chaos, beings that could manipulate human consciousness on a mass scale, and creatures that existed partially outside physical reality and therefore couldn't be fought with conventional weapons. The information was so detailed and strategically valuable that it was immediately classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. The intelligence officers monitoring Margaret noted that her predictions about the war's progression proved remarkably accurate. She anticipated major battles months before they occurred, described technological breakthroughs that were still in development, and provided insights into enemy strategies that proved correct when captured documents were later analyzed. The government began incorporating her supernatural intelligence into actual military planning. Margaret's sessions also revealed the existence of other supernatural communication networks operating within enemy governments. The entities warned that both Allied and Axis powers had access to otherworldly guidance, and that the human conflict was actually a proxy war between competing factions of supernatural intelligences. The side that best utilized its otherworldly advantages would gain significant advantages in preparing for the convergence. As Margaret aged through her 7 months of communication, government doctors documented physiological changes that defied medical explanation. Her brain showed increased electrical activity in regions associated with psychic phenomena. Her blood chemistry changed to include compounds that didn't match any known biological processes. Most remarkably, she began exhibiting abilities that suggested limited telepathic contact with other individuals who were receiving supernatural communications around the world. Margaret's death in 1944 was witnessed by government officials who filed reports describing supernatural phenomena that were immediately sealed as state secrets. Her final transmission included specific instructions for how government agencies should prepare for the convergence, including the establishment of secret research programs and the recruitment of individuals with supernatural abilities. The sixth and final generation communicator was Eleanor Ashcroft, who began her sessions in 1999. By this time, the family's role in supernatural communications had become a matter of national security, with Eleanor's sessions monitored by teams of scientists, linguists, and intelligence analysts working for classified government programs that had been developed based on previous generations' information. Eleanor's communications were fundamentally different from her predecessors' experiences. Instead of receiving information from external entities, she seemed to be accessing a collective consciousness that included all previous Ashcroft communicators. Her whispers contained the accumulated knowledge of 6 generations of supernatural contact, organized and synthesized into a comprehensive guide for navigating the approaching convergence. The technological resources available to monitor Eleanor's sessions were far beyond anything previous generations had access to. Her communications were recorded using advanced audio equipment, her physiological responses were monitored with medical sensors, and her brain activity was mapped using cutting-edge neuroscience technology. The resulting data provided unprecedented insight into how supernatural communication functioned at a biological level. Eleanor's whispers revealed that the convergence was no longer approaching, but had already begun. Supernatural phenomena were manifesting with increasing frequency around the world, though most incidents were being contained or covered up by government agencies that had been prepared by previous Ashcroft communications. The accumulated knowledge from 6 generations of contact had enabled humanity to develop effective responses to otherworldly threats. The entities explained through Eleanor that the Ashcroft bloodline's purpose was nearly complete. The family had successfully preserved and transmitted crucial knowledge across 3 centuries, ensuring that humanity would be prepared when supernatural forces attempted to reclaim dominance over Earth. The whisper sessions would end with Eleanor's generation, as the information had been fully delivered and the necessary preparations were in place. Eleanor's final communications included detailed assessments of humanity's readiness for the full-scale convergence event. She reported that technological development had proceeded according to supernatural guidance, that key individuals with supernatural abilities had been identified and recruited, and that global institutions were positioned to coordinate effective responses to otherworldly threats. When Eleanor died in 2000, her death marked the end of the Ashcroft family's 3-century role as supernatural communicators. But her final transmission contained one last revelation that changed everything observers thought they understood about the whisper sessions. The entities revealed that the Ashcroft women had not been passive recipients of supernatural information, but active participants in a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure humanity's survival. The women's consciousness had been gradually merged with supernatural intelligences over the course of 6 generations, creating a hybrid form of awareness that combined human intuition with otherworldly knowledge. Each generation had contributed their unique perspectives and experiences to this collective consciousness, building toward a synthesis that could guide humanity through challenges that were beyond purely human comprehension. The whispers had not been communications from external entities, but conversations between different aspects of an evolving hybrid consciousness that spanned both human and supernatural realms. The Ashcroft women had been slowly transformed into something more than human. Their consciousness expanded to encompass knowledge and capabilities that would be essential for navigating a reality where supernatural forces operated openly alongside conventional physical laws. Eleanor's death completed the transformation process, releasing the fully developed hybrid consciousness to operate independently of biological constraints. The accumulated knowledge and abilities of 6 generations of supernatural contact were now available to guide humanity through the convergence event, no longer requiring the sacrifice of individual women to serve as communication conduits. In 2021, government linguists finally succeeded in fully translating the ancient language the Ashcroft women had spoken during their whisper sessions. The decoded messages revealed detailed instructions for surviving and thriving during the convergence, including specific actions that needed to be taken by particular individuals at precise moments in time. The translations also contained personal messages from each generation of communicators to their descendants, explaining the true nature of their sacrifice and expressing their love for the family members who had supported them through their supernatural ordeals. The final decoded message was from Eleanor, addressed to future generations who would live through the convergence event. She explained that the whisper sessions had not been a curse, but a privilege, an opportunity to participate in humanity's evolution toward a species capable of coexisting with supernatural forces. She assured her descendants that the accumulated knowledge from 6 generations of supernatural contact would guide them safely through whatever challenges lay ahead. Today, the Ashcroft family's former home in Vermont serves as a research facility for government programs studying supernatural phenomena. The Eastern Wall, where 6 generations of women whispered to invisible entities, has been preserved exactly as it was during Eleanor's final sessions, though sensitive individuals who visit the location report that the wall no longer contains any supernatural presence. The whispers have ended, but their legacy continues. The knowledge preserved and transmitted by 6 generations of Ashcroft women has become the foundation for humanity's ongoing efforts to understand and integrate supernatural forces into modern society. Their midnight conversations with otherworldly intelligences have ensured that when the convergence reaches its peak, humanity will be ready to face whatever emerges from beyond the boundaries of conventional reality. The terrifying story of the Ashcroft family ultimately reveals a truth both humbling and hopeful, that some individuals are chosen to bear burdens that extend far beyond their personal lives, sacrificing their own comfort and sanity to preserve knowledge that will benefit all of humanity. The women who whispered to the walls were not victims of hereditary madness, but heroes whose courage and dedication helped prepare our species for challenges that are only now beginning to manifest. Their whispers continue to echo in government facilities, where researchers work around the clock to implement the supernatural defenses they helped develop. In classified laboratories where scientists study otherworldly phenomena using principles the Ashcroft women preserved, and in hidden command centers where military strategists plan responses to threats that exist beyond the boundaries of physical reality. The convergence is here. But thanks to 6 generations of women who sacrificed their sanity to preserve otherworldly knowledge, humanity is ready.